Okay, I just want to, first of all, thank you all for joining in on this virtual session on a kind of dark and dreary Monday here in Indianapolis. Thank you for your time. If you're watching the recording later, thank you so much. Just as a reminder, Kimberly has her hand raised. Let's see. Yes, Kimberly, you should be able to speak.
I'm sorry, that was an accident. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No worries. So if you guys do have something to say, raise your hand and I can turn your mic on and you can chat. I want to just mention that we do not have a live captioner today, but if you want closed captioning, you should be able to go to the bottom of your screen and click on live transcript. It should pop up when you move your mouse down there. Click on it, and then you'll click on another button that again says live transcript. And hopefully you can get the presentation that way if you prefer to have captioning on. I'll try to speak a little slower to make the captioning more accurate. But today we're going to talk about executive functioning in our current classrooms and what it looks like. So one thing that we really noticed here at the center over the last year is that certain behaviors are really upticking in classrooms in Indiana, and we're finding out now it's not just really Indiana, but rather it's nationwide. So I hope that you find this training extremely beneficial and informational. So we're just going to do a little welcome and introduction, and then we're going to move into executive function. What is it and why is it important? And then most importantly, we're going to talk about some applications for the classroom. And then we'll finish up with any questions that you guys may have and the ever important evaluation. So for starters, we have some resources. So you can either scan this QR code on your cell phone and you will get access to the Padlet. So you will always have access to this Padlet. It's not going to go away. Any information that gets added, you will also have access to. You can also just type in your browser, the padlet.com/IEPRC/executive functioning, and you can save it if you would like. In there, I've got the link, a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation for today and several resources that I'll be mentioning throughout our time together. So by the end of this session, I hope that you all will be able to identify executive functions, identify how they affect learning, and then identify strategies to use in the classroom and within the school setting. Another learning outcome that we're going to hopefully have today is that you are going to have a better understanding of your own executive functions and where your executive functioning may still need some room for improvement. So I am going to ask you to do a little poll. So you have a couple options. You can open a browser on your computer and you can type in pollev.com/Katie Mosley 808, or you can text Katie Mosley 808 to 37607. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a minute. But when I go to poll everywhere, the link and the text number will pop back up. So if you'll just bear with me for a second while I get that back up. Okay, so hopefully you can see the poll, who is here. If someone can just give me like a thumbs up on your emojis on Zoom so that I know that you can see this poll, I would appreciate it, or type something into the chat so that I know you can see it. Technology is not always my friend. Okay, awesome. You can see it. Okay, so who is here? I just want you to hit your letter of who's here, and I want to check it out, see who all is joining us today. If If there's an other, if you wouldn't mind typing in the chat what your role is, I would appreciate it just so that we can see. I want to make this training as beneficial as possible for you. And so knowing the audience will just help me do that just a little bit better. All right, so we've got some special education teachers, which is great. Some others, I'm guessing those are going to be my IEPRC staff members. Okay, more special education teachers. This is great information. Thank you so much. And yes, Jessica is a former special education teacher and so full of knowledge. Okay, so let's go to the second question that I have for you. What words come to mind when you hear executive functioning? And I only want, you can enter multiple words, but only enter one word at a time. If you are doing this via text, it may take you to a web browser, and you should just have a link that you can click. So executive functioning. If you have never used Poll Everywhere, I highly encourage you to give it a shot, especially if you're a teacher in the classroom. I love Poll Everywhere because it's free and you can ask all sorts of different styles of questions. I did the multiple choice. This one will be a word cloud if we get some responses in here. And then we have one more that we'll do later on this morning that is going to be more of a Q&A style. So Poll Everywhere is a really great option for your kiddos. And even if you're using it at like a staff meeting, one thing that I like about it as using this for adult training is that everything is anonymous. And so I can't see who's typing and who's responding. The kind of negative for using it with students, as you can see, is that the potential is there for them to maybe type or write something that they shouldn't, and then share it with the class. So I'm not sure if this one's having a bit of an issue or not. So I'm going to just stop sharing this. And maybe if you can in the chat, if you have a moment, go ahead and tell me a word or phrases that you think of when you hear the word executive functioning. This will not be anonymous, and that's okay. Maybe you don't know, and that's why you're here. And if you aren't sure how to answer, it's completely all right too. All right, so I'm going to minimize, and then let's get back to the PowerPoint. Okay, just do this from the current slide. Hopefully, there we go. Okay, Jessica said for executive function, back to task, absolutely. Organizational skills or the lack of organizational skills sometimes. Emotional control, metacognition, and organization, yes. Those are all important components of executive functioning. Okay, so I have this quote that I found relating to executive functioning, and I really feel that this quote speaks to our current situations in our classroom of things to remember. And children aren't born with these skills, referring to executive functioning skills. They're born with the potential to develop them. Some children may need more support than others to develop these skills. In other situations, children do not get what they need from their relationships with adults and the conditions in their environments, or worse, if those influence or sources of toxic stress, their skill development can be seriously delayed or impaired. And the key takeaways from this quote that are going to be important for us as we talk is knowing that children are not born with executive skills. We are only born with the potential to develop them, which is good news. And some children are going to need more support with executive function than what other students may need. We're going to talk about the importance of relationships, both good and bad, on executive functioning. Okay, so we are going to watch it's about a 3-minute clip. The IEPRC actually worked with an executive functioning specialist a few years ago named Sarah Ward, and we have a full interview on our website with her. But I pulled just a small section of this interview, like I said, about 3 minutes, that I want us to take a moment and watch. If you have trouble with the sound, please let me know.
So I think in education where we focus on reading and writing and math and all of those basic science and history, et cetera, but executive function is those skills that you just need to have and all people in general utilize every single day. So it's really the skill that gives you the ability to know what your plan and what your goal is and to really see.
Okay, having some sound issues, I see.
Into the future what it is that you want to accomplish. And then figure out, what is it that I'm going to do to actually achieve that goal? And then how do I that goal and carry it out and self-monitor? Then it's going, okay, then I sort of achieved goal versus actual. And I think the thing about that is that starts at the very early age.
Okay, it's a little better. You might try turning up the sound on your computer. I'm not sure if that will. I apologize.
School where we just start with play. And with play, we're imagining the goal is, well, I have a block, but my goal is that it's a fire truck. So I figure out how do I need to interact with that block to make it be a fire truck, scene, take out the role, say, fire. As you learn to the elementary ages, all teachers need to be teaching this to kids because in the elementary age, it's now being able to plan within the classroom. So the teacher gives you an assignment, you now have to be able to say, okay, well, what's my plan to move through the classroom to obtain the items that I need and to sit down and how do I know what the assignment is and then I'm working my way through it. And then as you get older and you hit sort of that middle and high school, you have to hold on to that plan over farther space of time. So now it's no longer be in the classroom, but I'm at my locker and I have to think about, what is it that I need when I go down the hall, up the stairs into my other classroom? And I have to remember to turn in my homework and make sure that I have the items for that class. Maybe it's goggles for my science experiment or my lab journal for recording the data in the experiment in. And then you even have to hold on to that sort of future image part of their class time. So it's being able to be at school and say, all right, well, now I'm going to go home this afternoon and I'm going to be home for 3 hours. And I have to remember, what is that homework? If I'm at home, what materials do I see that I have with me that I'll need? So then eventually, as you get older and older and you become employed and go through college, et cetera, now it's holding on to, all right, well, what is the project that I'm working on? When is the due date? How am I responsible for managing the materials and carrying out the meeting? So it's just a universal skill that we all have to do, and it grows and changes in age. So it's important that educators are addressing it from as young as preschool all the way through high school. And I think that's a big question I get. I think a lot of people will say, well, executive function, isn't that just sort of, recording your homework and organizing your backpack? We don't have to worry about that in school, or we don't have to worry about that. They're not doing that for projects in school, but it's just a skill that starts at a very young age where you really have to teach kids how to improve their working memory and hold on to their goal and carry it out. And it affects everything, every other academic skill. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for bearing through that. I hope that you got something out of that. I know the sound was a little wacky at times, but I appreciate you bearing with me through that. So I want to touch on a few things that Sarah mentioned in the video that you may or may not have picked up on, but Executive functioning skills refers to a set of skills we use every day, and we use it in our learning, in our work, in managing our daily life. Executive functions really encompass almost every aspect of our life. So, research doesn't always agree on just one definition. So you will, if you just Googled what is executive functioning, there will be many definitions that you will come across. It just has so many components that not everyone is in agreement and in what all is included. Executive functioning skills are foundational building blocks for both cognitive and social abilities. And that's an important piece to remember, that executive functioning skills don't just address our thinking, but really how we're interacting with others, peers, adults, and that sort of thing. It affects our focus, how we hold information, and even how we handle distractions. So what research does agree on is that executive functioning skills are essential for academic success. So those students who aren't as advanced in EF tend to struggle a little bit more academically. Think about that student who always has his or her locker all over the hallway and all over the classroom, everywhere except in his or her locker. Things are just spread all over the place. That's an executive functioning skill issue. Or the child who's just blurting out answers when you really want to hand raise. Early intervention is crucial for executive functioning. We're going to talk a little bit very briefly about the brain and how intervention can be used to help students enhance some of these skills. We know that executive function relates positively to learning. It's the process of learning, the how of learning, and the what of learning. And all three of those are very important for our students, starting with that just preschool age. So important, mentions this at the beginning, Sarah alluded to this, and I'm going to say it again, because it is so important that we understand that executive functioning is learned and developed. So that means if a child is not getting adequate access to things that might allow them to manage time or to inhibit behaviors, they're not going to come into our classrooms with those behaviors. And so they're going to have to be taught. We learn executive functioning skills most rapidly between the ages of 3 and 5. So those years are so critical. So preschool teachers, you have such an important job in helping these students with that great foundation. There's another spike in executive functioning development in adolescence. And really, research is suggesting now that it's up until the age of 25 that those executive functioning skills are really embedded. Again, skills are not embedded and they will form and develop as our brain develops. So in our classroom, I found this scribble drawing and I just thought it was perfect for explaining executive functioning. So you can see some of these observed behaviors. What does it look like in the classroom? Well, it may be disorganized or impulsive behavior, emotional, very emotional children. It's not just those middle school girls who tend to be emotional. Incomplete work, getting out of your seat often, difficulty with goal setting, being forgetful, no self-control, easily distracted, unable to plan ahead, and rigid in routines. So does any of that sound familiar to our current classrooms? I'm guessing that yes, it does, very much so. All right, I am not sure. My presentation, I'm going to need to stop sharing and then share this again. I do apologize. What would a presentation be without just a little hiccup or two? So this is really affecting some of my executive functioning skills, the ones that I struggle with a little bit more. What happens when something unexpected happens? Are you able to adjust? Well, I'm not doing a very good job of it. Let's see. Okay, here we go. All right, we're back on track. So in this, I cannot see if anyone responds in the chat. So Jessica, I know you're on with me. If someone has a question and I don't see it, can you please let me know? And I'm just assuming that you can, so I appreciate that. All right. Let's see. I didn't want to do that. Okay. So as we look at these observed behaviors, I want to just mention that if you're not familiar with Dr. Russell Berkeley, he is one of the leading researchers on executive functioning, and I encourage you to take a peek at some of his work. He has some great YouTube videos. Julie, I see you ask if you'll get the presentation. Jessica just answered yes, and it's in that Padlet link, and Jessica can share that link also in the chat with you. So Dr. Barkley is actually suggesting something that I think almost every educator would agree to, in that in the current state of our classrooms, children are functioning approximately 3 years behind executive functioning skills where they have in the past. And so if you think about what a typical 5 to 7 year old should be able to do, such as inhibit some impulsive behaviors in the classroom, that's really not showing in our classrooms until roughly ages 8 to 10. So what used to be in kindergarten, first and second grade is really now creeping up into third, fourth, and fifth grade. Another typical EF skill for a child who's 8 to 11, bringing books home and keeping track of them and the materials that they bring and being able to take them back to school. Research is showing us that just those first initial steps of being able to do that isn't really occurring until about 11 to 14. And that's a wide range, especially if we're getting kiddos in middle school and they're still unable to bring books back and forth. And I'm sure if you're in middle school, you will agree that yes, that is the case. I taught middle school for 19 years, and I noticed each year it seemed to get just a little worse. It was just a little different. And so teaching some of these skills became very important. So in the Padlet, one resource that you will have is signs of executive functioning issues at different ages. And so I really like this document. It's a front and back page that you can share with colleagues and staff, but just to talk about signs of executive functioning issues in like preschool, issues in grade school, middle school, and so on. So I encourage you to take a look at that document. So very, very, very briefly, I want to talk about brain development. I am not an expert on the brain, and I do not want to claim to be at all, but it is essential to understand just minimal parts of the brain and how they're kind of functioning and working, because they're so important to those executive functioning skills. So we know we have all of these nerve cells throughout our body, and all of these nerve cells communicate with each other. The reason we think what we think is because of these nerve cells, what we do, how we feel, all of these things go back to those nerve cells. And so in our brain, we have all of these little branches that develop. And so I just like to think of it as just like this giant interconnecting network, like a giant super highway. And all of these pieces are communicating through these synapses. And that's how we're getting the thinking to the action part. And it just enables us to send and receive messages. We're getting a message from our brain, we're sending it out to our body. So these little synapses are important because as a baby, we have about 2,500. Within 3 years, we have 15,000. And so you can see just the impact of those first 3 years of life. So if those first 3 years are stressful for a child, then they may not develop all of those synapses, which means they're not going to get all of that nerve cell development, which means their body and their mind isn't going to be communicating very well. And I know said that very simply, and it is not a simple process at all. There's another major surge in creating these synapses from about that later adolescence until that age of 25 again, which is when we have said on the previous slide that the executive functioning skills really start to close and solidify within our brains. And so the idea of the frontal lobes and the prefrontal cortex are extremely important. It's the last part of our brain that actually forms. And so very crudely, you think of your palm as the brain, and we've got that interior with emotions, right? The hypothalamus in there, and then everything else kind of forms around it. If you think of this part of your hand as the prefrontal cortex, it's the last part that comes together and closes. And so it's the last part that really moves us into adulthood from that. And so some people get stuck right there and they don't get that push forward. And so as an educator, it doesn't matter what age grade we're teaching, we all have such an important role in helping students to develop these skills. So different researchers, I wanted to mention too on the brain slide that it's important to note that the brain can change, right? We have this thing called neuroplasticity that allows our brain to develop more, to forget things, to prune what we don't remember or don't use and take that away from us. So keeping it in your mind that you can change these behaviors is important because of our brain being and having that neuroplasticity, we can always change and adapt and develop new behaviors. We're going to talk at the end through about repetition and reinforcement and how those can improve the different areas of executive functioning. Okay, so the essential skills. Like I said, many researchers will give different opinions about exactly what components will serve as an executive functioning skill. We are going to take a look at these main ones. You'll notice there are 3 stars: response inhibition, working memory, and emotional control. Most research that I have found tends to be on these 3 areas within the classroom across all grade levels. So the other ones are important and we're going to talk about them, but just for your knowledge, this is what most of them tend to be broken down into, just these 3 important parts. Okay, so I should have told you you're going to need a pen and a piece of paper or a phone here in just a few minutes where you can jot some things down. So our skills are really broken down into a couple of different categories. One being thinking or the cognition, the cognitive part of executive functioning. Those include things like working memory, planning and prioritizing, organization, time management, and metacognition. Working memory is perhaps one of the most important parts of the cognition because it's different from short-term memory, right? Short-term memory is, can we store it and can we recall it? Working memory is using that short-term memory, but it's actually manipulating it with another piece of information to come out with a new response. And so if we don't have that ability to have that working memory, we're going to struggle in the classroom. The other section of executive skills are the doing or the behavior, goal-directed persistence. Can we set a goal? Can we follow it? That cognitive flexibility, right? What happens when something out of the ordinary happens? How do we react? Are we able to adjust and get back on task? And how long does it take us to get back on task? Response inhibition, emotional control, and I've noticed I'm seeing a lot of this in classroom right now, is just that inability to handle emotions, sustained attention, and task initiation. You'll notice at the bottom of the slide, these skills that I'm going over are adapted from a wonderful book called The Smart But Scattered Guide to Success. I highly recommend the book. I do have a link to it in the Padlet, but there is the Smart But Scattered Guide to Success for teens and one for children. Okay, so here is where I want you to try to keep track of some things. We're going to break down each of these different components that we just mentioned, and we are going to look for your strengths and maybe your struggles a little bit in terms of executive functioning, because we all have areas where we're really strong and some areas where we really struggle. So when I first made this, I thought, I'm not going to put the topic at the top. And then I thought, I'm going to. So the first area that we're going to talk about is response inhibition. So there are 3 statements that I want you to respond to, and I want you to respond on a Likert scale of strongly disagree to strongly agree. So number 1, I don't jump to conclusions. So on the scale, where are you? And I know that you have these in front of you and that you can read them, but sometimes hearing something out loud is better. And we all know that giving choices and giving options is wonderful in our classroom. So I am going to read each of these statements. So you will assign a numerical value to your response. So if you strongly disagree that you don't jump to conclusions, you're going to give yourself a 1 on that. Number 2, I think before I speak. So where do you rank yourself on that? And number 3, I make sure I have all the facts before I take action. And in case you're wondering, you do not need to screenshot these slides. I actually have the entire questionnaire linked into that Padlet. You'll have to click on a link and you'll have to say that, yes, you are a practitioner. And then it will give you the entire questionnaire, and it's really great. I even gave it to my husband, and I feel like I had a good idea where he was, but he surprised me with a few things. So keep that number close by. All right, so when we think about response inhibition, it's really that thinking before acting. It's that time when you ask a question in class and you want the students to just really think about it, because not every student's going to be able to come up with an answer within just a moment. But then you have that student who blurts it out and it's like, oh man, I really wanted everybody to think about this before we had an answer. It's just that very difficult ability to resist the urge to say something. For some of us, that comes pretty naturally, and others, I find that it gets a little easier with age. So in the classroom, like I mentioned, we see the blurting out answers, except losing and being wrong. And I bet you're seeing this a lot in your classroom right now, that students struggle losing. They struggle when they don't have the right answer. Ask before taking another child's item, and then able to not argue if unhappy with a situation. If anyone figures that out, I think you could probably write a book on it and become pretty wealthy from that. So that's response inhibition. So next is working memory. So these are going to be statements 4 through 6. Again, it's the same scale. It'll be the same scale throughout each of these. Number 4, I have a good memory for facts, dates, and details. Strongly disagree is a 1, disagree 2, tend to disagree 3, tend to agree 4, agree 5, strongly agree 6. So statement 5, I am very good at remembering the things I have committed to do. And number 6, I seldom need reminders to complete tasks. So you will have a score number for section 4 through 6. And again, just kind of hang on to it. So let's look at what is involved with working memory. Like I mentioned earlier, it's not just the holding on to that information, but it's actually being able to perform some sort of complex task with the new information that we're storing. Oftentimes we draw on past experiences to apply it to a current situation. In the classroom, we might see working memory in young children when they can hold in and follow 1 or 2 step directions. Older children remember expectations of multiple teachers. And for middle schoolers, especially young middle schoolers, if they are changing teachers each period or every couple of periods, it is a lot in their mind to hold on to different expectations for different teachers. One teacher may have a policy where homework is passed up in rows. Some teachers may have a policy where it's placed into a tray in the back of the room or the front of the room. And so that can be difficult for students. Following teacher instructions to complete a task, and these can be verbal or written, recall relevant information, and then importantly, staying focused and paying attention. So if students are struggling with either of those latter two, we're definitely going to see some issues with working memory. So we are moving on to emotional control. Number 7, my emotions seldom get in the way of my job performance. 8, little things do not affect me emotionally or distract me from the task at hand. And number 9, when frustrated or angry, I keep my cool. Emotional control, just like what it is called, it's just that ability to manage those emotions. But in managing emotions, it's going to affect achieving tasks, completing them, and really controlling our behavior. I hope that you can start to see where some of these executive functions are going to overlap with each other. If one area is weak, more than likely another area is going to be weak with emotional control and maybe things like inhibitory responses. So in the classroom, a student with good emotional control can stay cool despite irritation, maybe despite that student who keeps kicking their chair or the little basket underneath the desk. They can recover from disappointment quickly and manage anxiety before a test. And this is very important, especially as we move up into high school grades, because we know the outcome of a test seems to be higher stake than what it was when students were younger, when it comes to college entrance exams and such. And so really figuring out how to control our emotions and handling that part of stress helps us later on as we get older. So next is sustained attention. So number 10, I find it easy to stay focused on my work. Number 11, once I start an assignment, you can replace that with project. I work diligently until it's completed. And number 12, even when interrupted, I find it easy to get back and complete the job at hand. For our younger kiddos, if you might have specific students in mind as I'm reading these, you might think, yes, that's now I can start to figure out what's going on a little better. And kindergarten teachers, I give you props. Preschool teachers, that sustained attention window is so small, and you guys are constantly on the move and on the go. I taught middle school and could never imagine teaching those little people like you do. So sustained attention is basically our capacity to pay attention to a task at hand, and importantly for our students, despite distractions. And this part is where we can really start to see our students struggle. May be able to stay focused and on task when it's quiet and they have no distractions, but maybe for another student, the quiet is the distraction. And so that's something that you can figure out. If a child is used to a lot of things going on in the background and that's how they best can focus when there's noise, then you need to keep that into consideration as well. It doesn't always have to be silent for someone to keep attention. So in the classroom, able to complete tasks without being asked multiple times and paying attention to homework with short breaks. So that's maybe more at home. A child with good sustained attention can be self-directed, can work on homework for maybe 15 minutes, take a little break, and then go back to the homework. It's also important when we think about project planning and that sort of thing. Can you plan that out? Can you stay focused to complete whatever task you need to do and then move on to the next? Which brings us to task initiation. So number 13, no matter what the task, I believe in getting started as soon as possible. Procrastination is usually not a problem for me. And number 15, I seldom leave tasks to the last minute. All right, so you should total up your score from those three statements. When we talk about task initiation, this is really the ability to begin a project, right? It's that initiation piece, that getting started. Can we sustain the attention to plan it out? So if you have trouble with task initiation, you're probably also going to struggle with the previous piece that we mentioned, just having that sustained attention and vice versa. So sometimes it's difficult to tell what is primarily happening. Am I losing attention, or is it just the getting started piece? An important part to mention here is that research is showing, Sarah Ward talks quite a bit about this, but she's talking about how teens can usually only visualize themselves 2 to 3 days in the future. And so this is important when we assign long projects. So if you assign a semester long project or a 9-week long project, we're asking those students to hold on and to plan and on their own get started on a project that is due so far into the future that they cannot even mentally picture themselves having that project finished. And so that's important because we would think and assume, and probably if you're a teacher, this comes very easily to you, but not to our students, that we can see our end goal, right? We can see 9 weeks into the future. We can see ourselves hitting that submit button on that final project. Teens can't. They can see 2 to 3 days ahead of time, and that's really about it. So in the classroom, I'm able to put away and stop a preferred activity to switch to a different one, and then able to start a project before the last minute. Okay, so planning and prioritizing. Number 16, when I start my day, I have a clear plan in my mind for what I hope to accomplish. 17, when I have a lot to do, I can easily focus on the most important things. And number 18, I typically break big tasks down into subtasks and timelines. So where are you on planning and prioritizing? So this is the ability to reach a goal or complete a task, to make decisions about what's important. So in the classroom, we might see this as breaking a task down into parts to help our students. Students who can plan and prioritize are able to settle peer conflicts, and they can formulate a plan. So planning and organizing is essential, and it's probably something that as educators, we are really good at, especially for a classroom teacher, because we have to always keep that end result in mind of where we want our students to go. And then we have to plan all of those steps in between to help get them there. So planning and prioritizing might come across as a bit of a bossy student, but really it's that students wanting to plan and prioritize different tasks in class. I will fully tell on myself that this is where I am probably the strongest, the planning, reaching a task. When we were younger, my brother and sister and I had a hard time with playing creatively, like outside. Let's imagine all of these things. No, I wanted to play office. My dad was in the military, and he would bring home like different like stamps and different envelopes, and I got so excited at those because I could plan them and I could make them just perfect, and I could stamp them, and I could give those orders to my brother and my sister, and I was very successful at that. But I struggled in other areas because my planning and prioritizing always took over. Didn't manage very well if something didn't go as planned, and I had to kind of rethink things. Organization, you can see that planning and prioritizing and organization, if you have one skill, you probably have the other when we stop and think about it. So number 19, I am an organized person. Number 20, it is natural for me to keep my area neat and organized. And 21, I am good at maintaining systems for organizing my work. So you've got those three. And hopefully you can come up with a number. And I'm probably going to speed up just a tad because I have so much that I want to get through. So really the ability to maintain and create systems to keep track of materials and information. As a kid, as an adult, this again is my strong suit. This is where I can help people. Classroom, easily able to find material in the backpack, notebook, folder. Always know where your personal materials are and puts items back in the correct location. I bet you have skills all over in your classrooms. So then we get time management. So number 22, at the end of the day, I've usually finished what I set out to do. 23, I'm good at estimating how long it takes to do something. And number 24, I am usually on time for appointments and activities. Okay, so time management is just our ability to estimate how much time we have, how to allocate it, and how to stay within time limits. Students who can't complete work on time, students who are tardy. This time management is, as an adult, my weakest area. I always underestimate time. I'm on time most of the time, but just the planning part, I struggle with this one. My husband, this is his strongest. We conflict. I want you to keep that in mind as we talk about applications into the classroom. So goal-directed persistence. I think of myself as being driven to meet my goals. Number 26, I easily give up immediate pleasures to work on long-term goals. As you answer that, think about how your students might answer that one. And number 27, I believe in setting and achieving high levels of performance. So goal-directed persistence is just having that ability to have a goal and then to see the goal through. Many of our students now struggle with that. It's difficult to set aside a fun activity to achieve a goal that is less desirable and not as preferred as the activity that they may be doing. Find ways around obstacles and saving money for a purchase. So then we have flexibility. This is sometimes referred to as cognitive flexibility. 28, I take unexpected events in stride. 29, I easily adjust to changes in plans and priorities. And 30, I consider myself to be flexible and adaptive to change. Okay, so can we revise plans? How do we recover from a setback? How long does it take for us to recover from a setback? Even a mistake. Sometimes when we make mistakes, it's hard to just get back on track. In the classroom, applying different rules to different settings. So that idea of generalizing, again, we can go back to thinking of turning in homework, knowing how one teacher has a procedure in her classroom compared to how another teacher may have it in his classroom. Ability to shift gears and adapt to different environments. Okay, so this slide is duplicated. So we're going to skip over to metacognition. And I know that your numbers are going to be off now. So there's going to be like a skip in 31, 32, and 33. Okay, so 34, which is really 31. I routinely evaluate my performance and devise methods for personal improvement. 35, which is really 32. I'm able to step back from a situation to make objective decisions. And 36, which is really 33. I am a big picture thinker and enjoy the problem solving with that. So metacognition is really a much more advanced skill. It's the ability to stand back and examine the situation. Can I remove myself? Can I objectively think through what needs to happen next? It's the ability to observe how to solve a problem. So that's a very complex networking in our brains, right? Is to figure out how to solve a problem. Metacognition is really just thinking about thinking, which is a hard concept. This would be a very difficult concept for young children. So when we think about classroom applications, we're going to think about change of behavior based on feedback. So that could be feedback from a teacher, feedback from a peer, able to examine one's own work, and the monitoring of one's own learning. So these are important. So if you go back, you can go back to the poll everywhere, or you can type into the chat, just checking on our time. Why do you think your executive functioning strengths and weaknesses matter? So take a look at those numbers in the different categories that you have. Look at where you are excelling. Look in where you have some room for improvement. Why do you think it would matter that you know where you are? And I like the idea of doing this on the poll everywhere just because it's anonymous. And so people may feel more willing to share. Let me bring that up. Hopefully. Okay, so if you want to respond, go right ahead. When I really think about executive functioning strengths and weaknesses in my classroom, as I look back, I can see where my strength to know expectations really affected my students who could not adapt to different situations, could not adapt to those different procedures. I couldn't understand why can't you turn your paper in? We turn it in the same way every single day. We put it in the tray. But for our students, not all of them can do that. And so I know that's one thing where I struggled with. If I would have thought more about it, and as I think back, I would have done things so much differently. Okay, so let's get back to our presentation. So the really big question is, how can we help our students in the classroom? You might be thinking, well, how does this seems disjointed? I'm looking at my strengths and weaknesses, my areas for growth, and now I need to help my kids. Where does it mesh? Well, it's important. It's important to keep that in mind because you're going to be working with these little people, right? These miniature adults. And so it's important that we figure out how we can reach them. But in order to do that, we have to be aware of our own strengths and weaknesses. And so these next few slides are going to really focus on the classroom part. One thing that is worth mentioning, helping our students in the classroom, the whole idea of Maslow before Bloom, right? We have to give them their needs, right? Their basic needs need to be met in order for students to learn anything. There are a couple of really good books that I would recommend about Maslow before Bloom. There's a Facebook group, Maslow before Bloom, also just talking about the importance of helping students where they are, having those emotional needs met in order to be able to learn. So building relationships, maybe you're not touchy-feely, you know, and all into all of the feelings and stuff, but you know what? You could give your kiddos a handshake, a high five, you could give them an elbow bump. I know we do need to be careful with physical touch because for some students, they wouldn't want us to touch them. Maybe even a high five is too much for them. So just be sure you know your audience. Maybe you can give an air high five or something like that. Praise the child's actions or whatever they're doing. Don't praise him or her personally. Don't say, you know, I think you are great, right? Say, or say something like, I love the effort that you put on this task. I love how you thought about that question, right? So we're taking it off of the student and we're really putting it on the action that the student is doing. Check in with your students. And these can be really easy things that you can do. You can opportunities to respond, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. You know, you can check in with the whole group of students using like a fist to 5. Like, how are you feeling about this assignment? 0, you're completely lost and you just want to go home and start over. or a 5, I feel like I can do this assignment and have no worries. That lets the students know that you care and they need that. Give students jobs and responsibilities, right? It's not just your classroom, it's the students' classroom too. It's their home away from home, might be the place that they enjoy going to the most. And so give them some responsibility with that. Follow through with what you say. This is especially important as we talk about some of these other strategies that we're going to use. If you tell your students you're going to do something, be sure you do it. Have high expectations for your kiddos. And then there's always the 2x10, which that's just thinking of a student, and you are going to take 10 instructional days in a row. And for 2 minutes, each of those days, you're going to talk to that student about anything except school. You can find out what their hobbies are, maybe ask them what they did the past weekend that they had fun with, anything like that. Just don't talk about school. It really opens that conversation to more than just math or science. So really lowering students' stress and anxiety, it just relaxes that limbic system, which is the important part for skill retention. If that system is always stressed, then the learning isn't going to come and the skills aren't going to be retained. So some other strategies that you can do are just to reduce that cognitive load, right? Reduce what's going on inside the kiddos' heads. So breaking tasks down into chunks is important. So if you have that long project that you want the students to finish, it's great to have that long project, but break it down in chunks. Activate prior learning. You can do this with like a KWL chart. You can use some sort of graphic organizer, a word cloud, just to get the students thinking about what it is you're going to be talking about next. Because sometimes if you say, we're going to talk about the Civil War, and a student's like, I don't know anything about the Civil War, and you just go into your lecture about it, they're going to be lost the whole time. However, if you have the students brainstorm and think out loud, then that's going to set off a chain. And it's going to just be more likely that the child's going to remember what they've already been taught. So have instructions in visual form, written and pictures. We're going to talk about the importance of this here in just a few minutes. Provide information in multiple ways. So not all of our students are auditory learners. Not all of them can just read something and comprehend it. And so we need to be sure that we're giving them multiple ways to take in the information. Another way to reduce cognitive load is to have a routine in the classroom. I think educators are probably some of the best people at setting those routines because we know that the little people in our lives really need it. Okay, so next we want to think about scaffolding. And I could talk all day about scaffolding because I'm sure that you talked about it when you went through college and you're talking about it now in schools. Scaffolding is so important, not just for kids in our classroom, but really scaffolding in everyday lives. So I think when I think of scaffolding, I heard this example and it's always stuck with me about a child crossing a street, right? When you're crossing a street or walking down a sidewalk, when you have a young child, you're probably holding the child. But then as the child gets a little older, you're holding hands. And then eventually they can just walk beside you. And then eventually they can walk behind you or in front of you. And then eventually they can do it on their own. That's scaffolding. So it really allows us to connect old concepts to new concepts because it can be building on that foundational knowledge. Visuals are important. We're going to talk a lot about those in the next couple of slides. Front-loading information. So giving students more information up front than what they might need, or front-loading it with certain vocabulary right before you're going to talk about something. Be sure that the vocabulary for the student is there. So if you're going to talk about precipitation in science class, do students know what precipitation is? We'll just front load that vocabulary word, because when you say rain, snow, they're going to be like, oh yeah, well, I know what that is, but I didn't know it was precipitation. So just some strategies like that, having that time to talk, just like in reducing the cognitive load slide about activating prior knowledge, giving students that time, not unstructured, but very structured and very deliberately planned to activate that prior knowledge, is an example of a scaffolding. And then we have this idea of backward chaining. And this is a concept that I'm just a really big fan of. And before we talk about backward chaining, I just want to remind you, scaffolding is meant to be lessened and taken away, right? We don't want to set up scaffolds that stay there forever. When we look at buildings, we don't see the construction scaffolds, right? When the building is finished, they're all taken away because the building can stand on its own. It can do its job without relying on the help of something else. That's really what scaffolding is in our classrooms, and that's what we need to think about. So as we think about backward chaining, it's really the idea of teaching steps in reverse. And you might be like, well, why on earth would I want to do that? But I want you to think about that student who never completes a project. Think about that student who can never follow through on my word. Think about that student who can never remember where a book or a pen or a pencil or an assignment is. They never get that joy, that feeling of accomplishment, that, yes, I finished a task. And that's very important, because the idea of finishing a task can motivate us to want to go to the next task. And the difference between backward chaining and forward chaining is that forward is going to start with the very first step. But when we think about what we've learned about executive functioning and what it might mean from the first step to the last step and visualizing that last step, we have so many kiddos who can't see that last step. And so they're never going to get started. And so showing them that final step and showing them they complete that can be a really big boost for some of our students. So thinking about, I gave the example with scaffolding and hand holding. Think about even brushing teeth. If you've ever had a baby, right? You're not just going to give a baby a toothbrush or say, hey, go brush your teeth. No, you're going to go to the bathroom. You are going to get that toothbrush. You are going to put toothpaste or baby paste on that toothbrush, and you are going to brush those gums or those teeth. Then child gets a little older, a little more independent. They want to hold the toothbrush. Great. So you do all the steps. And then you put the toothpaste on, and then you give them the toothbrush, and then they brush their teeth themselves. So we're backward chaining, right? So then we think the next step would be put the toothpaste on the toothpaste, right? But even with that, maybe with the first child, you're like, okay, here, you can put the toothpaste on, and then you get a whole tube squeezed out, and then you're like, oh, I should have held their hand. I should have showed them what it felt like to squeeze just a small amount of toothpaste. Then you take that scaffold away until they're putting the toothpaste on in a properly sized amount, and they're finishing the task themselves. So you can see how this just builds, right? We're building on that finished product, but they're always getting that end part in. So we're just reinforcing what that end result is going to look like. Backward chaining is very important, and we're going to look at a few examples. So these examples on the next few slides are from Sarah Ward, and she talks a lot about time and how we need to help our students visualize time. Speaking of time, okay, we're at 19 minutes to go. She uses a method called get ready, do, and done, and it starts out something like this, where each step is shown. So what do I have to get ready? So what do I need to start a task? And then the green, what steps do I need to complete? And then finally, what does the finished product look like? So executive functioning skills really rely on that perspective of looking at the future self. What does the future student who is turning in this project, what does that student look like? So we can help show this to our students. They don't have generally that internal time structure that recognizes that relationship between movement and time. I admitted this is where I struggle in executive functioning. I have a trouble connecting the idea of 5 minutes, not so much 5 minutes, 5 hours, to having something done. It either gets done way early or way late. So an example of a project completion. Here's what your kiddos are going to need, right? They're going to need construction paper. They're going to need the egg carton, markers, scissors. So everything that they need to see is right there, because we need to start to create that mental image for the students, because they need that. They need to put it in their minds. And with these pictures, we are only helping them to see the future part of it. They have to make that connection to the image. Okay, so what am I going to do after I have these materials? Well, you're going to do all of these things. Okay, great. What's it going to look like when it's done? And the students can see this. And then even at the end of it, you can put, a little reminder, put your name on your paper, clean up, those sorts of things. Cueing and semantic recall. That's what I was saying about the pictures. We are cueing the students, and we're allowing that semantic recall, right, of linking that the picture with what it means. And so if you're a parent, maybe, and you struggle saying, we're going to get ready first, you need to be ready for soccer practice at 6. Well, what does that look like? Have you ever said that to your own child, or maybe to a student? Like, I need you to have everything ready to go by 2 p.m. for the end of the school day. Well, what does that look like? It probably means that the folders in the backpack, all work has been checked, lunchbox is ready to go, socks and shoes are on. For some young kiddos in classrooms, that may be a really big problem. Maybe my jacket's on. When you say get ready, that tells them nothing. What does it look like when they are ready? Just like in this example, this girl is now ready to go to school, right? She knew she needed her headband, her coat, a snack, her bag, her homework, and her shoes for gym class. So I hope you can see now there's a difference between saying, okay, I need you ready at 4 p.m. to here's what it looks like. Our students are visual. So the other idea of being visual is making time visible. This is very important. I know most people don't use analog clocks anymore, right? Because everything's digital. But I want you to think about the idea of an analog clock and how it can really separate those time differences. So Sarah actually recommends getting an analog clock and some dry erase markers and letting the students draw on them, right? So you can see they have 5 minutes in that yellow area, whatever that yellow area is in your classroom. And then they're going to spend the next 25 minutes doing the green. What is it that's in the green? And then by 2:36 is that red time. So that's maybe clean up and getting things put back to where they need to be. So we're really making that time visual, right? We're not just saying you have 20 minutes. It's you have 20 minutes and here's what it looks like. 10 minutes in, this is what should be done. And then just adjust from there. So then those are might be some more individual interventions that you can try, or strategies, but you can also use class-wide intervention strategies. So if you have a class of children who they are all struggling with one aspect of executive functioning, maybe they're all blurt out the answer kind of kiddo. And so you really want to get it to where they're raising their hands, right? So that they're not interrupting another student's thought, right? Because we want them to think about that. So these group-wide, these class-wide interventions can really cut down on time. They're usually low impact on resources. You just don't need very much. It can prevent future difficulties, and it has positive effects for both weaker and stronger students. So there are 3 examples, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. I'll be happy to elaborate more. I did put instructions on how to do them, but 3 examples of class-wide interventions for behavior are the good behavior game, the mystery motivator, and opportunities to respond, or total participation techniques. So good behavior game is something that you can do, and the mystery motivator are things that you can do with the whole class when you're really trying to promote one behavior, such as hand raising. They will be rewarded, so you'll have to figure out a reward of some sort. But basically, you're going to talk about the negative behaviors. What do those look like? The example, leaving your seat, or leaving your seat without getting permission first. That's the negative behavior. Blurting out an answer, that's a negative behavior. Well, then you have to teach the positive behavior, right? So instead of blurting out an answer, maybe I want you to raise your hand. You have to teach them that. Determine the reward. It could be a daily reward. It could be a weekly reward. Just keep the age of your students and their cognitive just ability in mind as you do that, right? Because for a preschooler, you're not going to have a 3-day wait period, because we know we're not going to see much progress. It's going to have to be much more instant. So teach the game to the entire class, divide them into 2 teams, and then play. Mystery motivator is very similar to this. You're defining a target behavior and giving them that replacement behavior. So don't blurt out an answer. Instead, raise your hand. You're going to determine a behavior number cutoff. So initially, you're going to go half of what you would ultimately want in your class. And then you need to give visuals of replacement behaviors, right? Kids need that meaning, that tying to raising my hand. We might think this is so simple. Who doesn't know how to raise their hand? It's not that they don't know how to raise their hand. It's just that they can't make that connection between raising the hand and what they're supposed to do. So those visual cues really help. Put a picture of the student raising their hand on their desk, or maybe put it up on the board when you ask the kids a question. Many classrooms now have smart boards or projectors. Just put a picture of your entire class raising their hand. That will be their signal that, oh yeah, I don't blurt out my answer. I need to raise my hand because I have to give other students time to think about this answer before I say what I think it might be. And you're going to create a reward envelope. And then you can just format a calendar with the hidden mystery motivator dates. Maybe about 60% of the days to start with, right? Because we want to reward the behavior to hope that it continues to increase. And then we can say, once we get so far, maybe we're going to spell out a word. Once we spell out that word, then we get the prize. But the prize is a mystery. It might be something small. Maybe you show the class pictures of your dog. Maybe you show them a 10-minute educational YouTube video on something interesting that they're learning in class that's extra. So be sure that you provide feedback with that and give encouragement along the way. And it's important to know that not the entire class has to earn the rewards, right? Just part of the class can do it, or maybe it's something you are doing just one-on-one with a student as a very targeted intervention strategy. Increasing opportunities to respond also helps students. It just helps them get into that, the idea of, okay, this is the routine, this is what I do. Things like whiteboard responses, maybe you have group graffiti, put a big poster size board up or something and let the students write answers and responses to it. Fist to 5 that I talked about earlier, the fist, you have no clue, you're lost. You feel like you have no idea what you're doing, to 5, I fully get this. I could teach this to someone else if I had to. So thinking about something and pairing and sharing is pretty common, but take that a step further and go into a square, right? So you're going into a group of 4. So you're thinking about something, you're pairing, and you're sharing with your partner, and then you're going to share with 3 partners. What did you like? What did you learn? What do you still wonder? using different forms of technology, Class Dojo, or that's not really for opportunities to respond. Things like Poll Everywhere is a great way to respond. You can use Quizlets, those sorts of things. Voting with your feet, stand up if you can tell me what 13 minus 7 is, something like that. But it gets the students up and moving also. So I kind of want to leave you with this thought that children are like wet cement. Whatever falls on them makes an impression. And we really have the ability every day to make a good impression, to teach our students the executive functioning skills that they need that will help them to be successful in the classroom. Hopefully generalize it to outside of just our classrooms, into other classrooms in the building, and then out into their everyday. Okay, so kind of wraps up. This was like a whirlwind 90 minutes. I am not used to talking for that long. I really thrive on group interaction and seeing faces. This has been a bit of a challenge, but it has been so fun. So please, before you leave today, if you could complete an evaluation, I would really appreciate it. This is the first time that this training has been delivered. And so I would appreciate the feedback. What worked well, what didn't work well? What would you like to have things done differently? I will put in the chat this link so that you can just use the chat if that's easier for you. Do that right now. And if you have any questions, anything you would like to add, feel free to type anything in the chat. This is my contact information. The document I mentioned earlier, is that the executive function checklist? Can't find the Padlet. Thank you, Jessica. Oh, wrong link. Okay. Let me see if I can pull up the Padlet. Okay, so here is the Padlet, although I am, oh, okay, that's the wrong Padlet, that's why. So here's the Padlet that hopefully you can see. If it's the executive functioning, yes, thank you, Jessica, for putting that in there. I'm having technical difficulties. That's every day for me. You can find that executive functioning checklist under additional resources. So also have some helpful websites and those sorts of things on there. I really want to thank you guys for this presentation today, for allowing me to give it to you. I want to mention under helpful websites, if you have parents who ask how they can help their own students, I highly encourage the SethPerler.com site. Seth is a master at executive functioning and how to explain it to parents, and for parents, how parents can best help their students. He talks a lot about different strategies in helping students and teachers. He gives some great suggestions in there as well. I highly recommend his website. Dr. Russell Barkley, again, anything that he has is going to be wonderful as well. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to hearing from you. Please don't hesitate to reach out. You have my contact information. You have my email and cell phone. Feel free to call, text, email, anything. I just, again, thank you so much and hope that you guys have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Hi, I had a quick question.
Oh, please go ahead.
I'm sorry. I had a couple of connection issues. Were you saying anything about a certificate, like for the training?
Yes, so you will get that emailed to you. Thank you for bringing that up. I
Okay,
was supposed
okay.
to mention that and forgot. It wasn't written.
No,
I
I'm
forgot to write
sorry.
on it.
I couldn't tell if you were saying something about it, but yeah, my internet's been going in and out. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
No, you're great. I am actually so glad you asked that. So you will be getting in email a certificate.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank
You
you.
are
And then you
welcome.
were saying something else about the I guess, your feedback. Did you say something about putting a link in the chat for the feedback?
Yes, it should be in there, but I can. Do you see it in there? I can actually, I'll just paste it in there again. Let's see. Things kind of get lost in that chat.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. Again, I appreciate your time. Please reach out with any questions. Thanks, guys.